I won't let the doctors take you until you wire your brother $2,000 for his phone, my father declared while I gasped in pain in a snowdrift. My spine had snapped when my brother shoved me for a prank, but to my parents, only his gadget was sacred. However, that day was the last time they would ever dictate terms to me. The MRI at the hospital revealed something that forced the doctors to lock the ward doors and call the cops immediately. "Walk it off, Clara. You're fine," my father growled as I curled into a ball on the frozen ground. My brother stood over me, his face a mask of irritation. "She's just doing this for the attention," he muttered. Even my mother, usually the voice of reason, sighed in exasperation. "Honestly, you'll do anything to ruin a quiet weekend." But when my vision went dark and the medical technician finally arrived to run a scan, the woman turned to my parents with a look of pure steel. "You might want to contact your legal counsel," she said quietly. "Because the imaging has revealed a history of truth you've spent years trying to bury." Only minutes before that realization, I was lying twisted in the freezing drifts of the Oregon Cascades, unable to feel my legs, staring up at a man I no longer recognized as my father. He wasn't reaching for a phone to call for help. He was standing over me, shouting that I needed to wire $2,000 for my brother's cracked screen before he'd let the paramedics touch me. To understand why I was lying in the snow while my father negotiated the price of a piece of glass, you have to understand the hierarchy of our family. In the small, fragile kingdom my parents had built, Julian was the emperor and I was the mule. We had arrived at the remote mountain cabin in the late afternoon. The driveway was a treacherous sheet of black ice, steep and unforgiving. I parked my 10-year-old sedan at the bottom, pulling the emergency brake with a silent prayer. Meanwhile, Julian's luxury SUV, a gift from my parents, sat idling at the top, the engine running to keep the interior at a perfect 72 degrees. "Clara, grab the black duffel," my father shouted from the porch. "And be careful. That's the central server." It wasn't a server. It was a high-end gaming console wrapped in a sweatshirt. But in my father's delusion, everything Julian touched was enterprise-grade technology. I hauled the heavy bag along with 2 suitcases of groceries and my mother's vanity case. The wind cut through my thin wool coat. I watched Julian standing at the top of the stairs, holding a stabilizer and panning his camera across the snowy horizon. He wasn't helping, he was talking to a digital audience about focus and the alpha energy of the wilderness. My boots slipped on the ice. I stumbled, catching my breath with a sharp gasp. "Watch it!" my mother snapped. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Julian's designer jacket. "Julian, honey, zip up. You can't afford to get sick right before the big launch." There was no launch. There was no company. But looking at them, huddled around him like he was a priceless artifact, I finally understood the mechanism. It wasn't just favoritism, it was a survival strategy for their own egos. They needed Julian to be the genius visionary, because if he was just a 30-year-old unemployed man living in their basement, then they were failures. They needed the lie. And for the lie to work, they needed someone to carry the weight. They needed a servant to absorb the reality of labor so the golden child could remain unblemished. I was the landfill for their reality. That night, the dynamic became suffocating. I had paid the deposit for the rental, a non-refundable $2,000 I'd scraped together from my savings. Yet, I was assigned the lumpy pull-out couch in the drafty main room. Julian, who hadn't contributed a cent, took the master suite with the cedar sauna because he needed mental space to visualize the market. Dinner was a theater of the absurd. We sat around a heavy timber table while Julian held court. "The metrics are showing a double-bottom reversal," Julian said, waving a fork. "I'm leveraging the liquidity pool for a maximum yield. It's essentially passive income, if you have the nerves for it." It was absolute gibberish. I work in logistics, I manage complex supply chains for a regional shipping fleet. I know what leverage and liquidity actually mean. Julian was simply repeating buzzwords he'd heard on a finance stream. That's incredible, son, my father said, nodding with solemn pride. He turned to me, his eyes cooling. You see, Clara. You work hard for pennies. Julian works smart for millions. Actually, I said, setting down my water glass, if the liquidity is locked, how are you paying for gas tomorrow? You asked me for $50 in the driveway. The silence was instant and hostile. My mother slammed her palm against the table. Don't do that, she hissed. Don't bring your petty jealousy into his process. He's building an empire, and you're worrying about gas money. You have no vision, Clara. That's why you'll always just be an assistant. I looked at them, my father beaming at a fraud, my mother attacking the only person in the room with a steady paycheck. I didn't argue. I didn't defend my career. I simply realized that in their story, I was the villain because I kept trying to turn on the lights. I went to sleep on the thin mattress, listening to the wind howl against the glass, unaware that the ice outside was hardening into a weapon that would shatter everything by sunrise. The next morning, the silence of the mountains was absolute. I woke up shivering. The fire had died out hours ago, and the cold had seeped into the cabin, turning my breath into pale ghosts. I checked my phone, it was barely 7 a.m. I walked to the kitchen to make coffee, my muscles stiff from the previous day's labor. Through the sliding glass door, I could see the deck. Overnight, a layer of mist had frozen into a sheet of glass, slick and deadly. I was pouring the first cup when Julian walked in, already dressed in brand new mountain gear. Morning, team, he whispered to his screen, his camera already live. We're up early. We're grinding while the competition sleeps. Going to do a quick cold exposure reset on the deck. Watch this. He winked at the lens and pointed to the door. Clara, grab your coffee. Come out here. I need a second angle. It's freezing, Julian, I said, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. And the deck is a death trap of ice. Don't be a buzzkill, he snapped, his persona slipping for a fraction of a second. Just stand by the railing. It's for the brand. I sighed. It was always easier to comply than to argue. I pulled on my boots and stepped out. The cold hit me like a physical blow. The wood beneath my feet was treacherous, coated in ice so clear it was invisible. I moved carefully toward the railing. Okay, I'm here, I said, turning my back to the stairs. What do you want? Just look natural, Julian directed, positioning himself behind a thick pillar near the door. Act like you're enjoying the view. I turned toward the trees, my back to him. I heard the shuffle of boots on ice, then a suppressed giggle. Prank time, he whispered, loud enough for his microphone, but quiet enough that I barely registered the words. I didn't hear him move. I only felt the sudden, violent shove against my shoulders. It wasn't a playful nudge. It was a forceful, two-handed strike meant to startle me into dropping my coffee for a reaction shot. Boom! He yelled. But he miscalculated. He miscalculated the ice, and he miscalculated his own footing. As he shoved me, his boots lost traction. His weight drove into me harder than intended. I flew forward. My feet went out from under me. I didn't just stumble, I was launched. I hit the railing with my lower back, a sickening, wet crunch that seemed to echo through the silent woods. And then I flipped over the edge. The world became a blur of gray sky and jagged pines. I landed hard on the wooden stairs below, my body twisting in a way it wasn't designed to move. I slid down several steps and came to a stop in a heap of snow and absolute agony. Silence. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but the wind. Then, from the deck above, a scream broke the quiet. But it wasn't a scream of concern. No. My device. The display. I lay there, staring at the sky. The pain hadn't truly arrived yet, just a strange, hollow numbness spreading from my waist down. I tried to move my legs to stand up. Nothing happened. My brain sent the signal, but the connection was severed. Above me, the door flew open. I heard heavy footsteps thundering across the deck. "Julian, are you okay?" My mother's voice was shrill with panic. She made me drop it. Julian wailed. She flailed her arms and hit my hand. "Look at the screen. It's shattered." "Oh heavens," my father gasped. "Is the data intact?" I tried to call out. "Mom. Dad," my voice was a broken whisper. They didn't look over the railing. They were huddled around my brother, 3 heads bowed over a piece of broken electronics. "It's flickering," Julian sobbed. "I'm losing the feed." "It's all right, son," my father soothed. "We'll get it fixed. We'll go to the city immediately." Lying there in the snow, unable to feel my toes, the truth finally crystallized. They hadn't even looked to see where I had fallen. The sound of my spine hitting the wood had been drowned out by the tragedy of a cracked phone. It was barely 7 in the morning when I hauled myself into the kitchen. The cabin was a tomb of lingering cold, and my muscles were locked in stiff protest from the previous day's labor. Through the sliding glass door, the deck looked deceptively peaceful, but I knew better. Overnight, the mist had refrozen into a skin of black ice, slick and lethal. I was pouring my first cup of coffee when Julian entered. He was already fully dressed in his mountain gear, the designer tags still fluttering from his sleeves. He held his phone aloft, his voice a low, practiced murmur for his audience. "Morning, team. We're up early. We're grinding while the competition sleeps. I'm about to do a quick mental reset out on the deck. Watch this." He winked at the camera and gestured toward the door. "Clara, grab your coffee. Come out here. I need a second angle." "It's freezing, Julian," I said, my fingers tight around the warm mug. "And the deck is a sheet of glass." "Don't be a buzzkill," he snapped, the streamer persona slipping for a fraction of a second to reveal the petulant brother beneath. "Just stand by the railing. It's for the content. It's for the brand." I sighed, the weight of a lifetime of compliance settling on my shoulders. It was always easier to give in than to endure his tantrums. I pulled on my boots and stepped out onto the wood. The cold hit me like a physical strike. The surface beneath my feet was treacherous, coated in ice so clear it looked like polished stone. I moved with agonizing care toward the railing, holding my coffee with both hands. "Okay, I'm here," I said, my back turned to the stairs that led down toward the driveway. "What do you want me to do?" "Just look natural," Julian directed. He positioned himself behind a thick timber pillar near the door. "Act like you're actually enjoying the view." I turned toward the tree-line, my back to him. I heard the faint shuffle of his boots on the ice, followed by a low, sharp giggle. "Prank time," he whispered, loud enough for his microphone to catch, but quiet enough that I barely registered the warning. I didn't hear him move. I only felt the sudden, violent shove against my shoulder blades. It wasn't a playful nudge, it was a forceful, two-handed strike intended to make me jump and spill my coffee for the sake of a reaction shot. Boom! He shrieked. But he had miscalculated. He miscalculated the ice, his own momentum, and the physics of his own cruelty. As he shoved me, his boots lost their grip. He slipped, flailing, and his entire weight drove into me with far more force than he had intended. I was launched forward. My feet vanished from under me. I didn't just stumble, I was propelled. My lower back hit the heavy railing with a sickening, wet crunch that seemed to vibrate through the entire mountain. Then, I flipped over the edge. The world became a chaotic spin of gray sky, jagged pines, and white snow. I landed hard on the wooden stairs below, my body twisting in a way that defied nature. I slid down 3 steps and came to rest in a heap of snow and absolute, blinding agony. Silence followed. For a long moment, there was no sound but the wind whistling through the branches. Then, from the deck above, a scream broke the quiet. But it wasn't a scream of terror for my life. No. No, no, no. My charts. My screen. I lay there, staring up at the slate-gray sky. The true pain hadn't registered yet, only a strange, terrifying numbness spreading from my waist downward. I tried to move my legs, to push myself up and see what had happened. Nothing. My brain sent the command but my body refused to answer. Above me, I heard Julian scrambling on the ice. Mom. Dad. Help. The cabin door flew open. Heavy footsteps thundered across the deck. Julian, are you okay? My mother's voice was thin with panic. She made me drop it. Julian wailed. She flailed around and hit my hand. Look at the display, it's shattered. Good God, my father gasped. Is the data backed up? Is the crypto wallet safe? I tried to call out. Mom, my voice was a dry croak. Dad. They didn't look over the railing. They were huddled together, 3 heads bowed in mourning over a piece of broken glass and metal. It's flickering, Julian sobbed. I can't see the metrics. I'm losing money by the second. It's okay, son, my father soothed. We'll fix it. We'll get it replaced immediately. Lying there in the freezing drift, unable to feel my toes, the truth finally set in. They hadn't even checked to see where I had landed. The sound of my spine fracturing against the timber had been drowned out by the tragedy of a cracked screen. I drifted, losing time, until I was pulled back by the sound of crunching snow. My vision swam, the sky and the pine needles spinning in a nauseating dance. I tried to sit up, but a wave of white-hot agony slammed me back into the earth. Then I saw them. My parents were rushing down the stairs. For a fleeting, foolish second, a childhood instinct flared up within me. They're coming. They're coming to save me. But they didn't stop at the step where I lay twisted. They didn't kneel beside me, check my pulse, or brush the snow from my face. They stepped over me, literally. My father's heavy boot landed inches from my eyes as he hurried past toward the driveway where Julian was still kneeling. My mother skirted around my paralyzed legs, her gaze fixed entirely on the device in Julian's trembling hands. Let me see, my father demanded, his voice thick with anxiety. Is the screen responsive at all? It's dead. Julian wailed, holding the phone up like a fallen soldier. The display is bleeding pixels. Look at the crack, it's right over the biometric sensor. You clumsy idiot. The scream wasn't directed at Julian. It was aimed at me. My mother turned, her face contorted not with concern, but with a sharp, ugly fury. Look at what you did, Clara. You flailed around like a maniac and hit his hand. You ruined the vibe. You've ruined the entire weekend. Mom, I wheezed, the cold air burning my lungs. I can't feel my legs. Oh, stop it. She snapped, waving a hand dismissively. Stop trying to deflect. You always do this. You break something valuable and then play the victim so we can't be mad at you. It's manipulative and I'm sick of it. Stop trying to deflect. You always do this. You break something irreplaceable and then play the martyr so we can't hold you accountable. It's manipulative, Clara. Evelyn's voice was sharp, but my father interrupted her, his tone hollow with a different kind of shock. Look at the frame, Mark said, ignoring me entirely. The chassis is warped. This isn't a simple repair. It's a total loss. Do you have any idea what the replacement cost is for a limited edition titanium build? I was right in the middle of a live feed, Julian shouted, his voice cracking with performative agony. I had over 1,000 people watching. They saw the signal drop. My entire brand is going to tank because of her. He'd had 12 viewers. I knew because I'd checked his account earlier that morning. But in that moment, the numbers didn't matter. What mattered was the hierarchy. Lying there as the cold began to feel like a heavy, suffocating blanket, I finally understood the trap of our lives. It wasn't that they hated me, it was a simple value assessment. In their eyes, Julian was the investment. He was the protagonist. Therefore his tools, his vanity, and his digital empire were sacred relics. I was just the support staff. My body was a piece of infrastructure, like a floorboard or a shelf. If a shelf collapses and chips the king's crown, you don't weep for the wood. You curse it for failing its only purpose. Dad, I tried again. My voice was stronger this time, sharpened by a rising tide of terror. My back. I heard it snap. Please. Mark finally looked down at me. His eyes were cold, assessing me not as a daughter in pain, but as a liability. Get up, Clara, he growled. Stop making a theatrical display in the yard. The neighbors will see. I can't move, I whispered. You're just hiding behind embarrassment because you know you owe your brother for that device. Call an ambulance, I managed to say. Absolutely not, Evelyn said instantly. We aren't having sirens and flashing lights at this cabin. We don't have the coverage for a mountain transport just because you bruised your tailbone. We'll help you to the car once Julian is settled. Right now, we need to get him inside. He's shivering. My hands are shaking, Julian whimpered, clutching the broken glass to his chest. I can't feel my fingers. Oh, sweetheart. Let's get you to the fire, my mother cooed, wrapping her arm around his shoulders. Mark helped Julian to his feet, and led him toward the warmth of the cabin, leaving me paralyzed in the snow. Don't move, Clara, my father called back over his shoulder. Think about how you're going to pay for the damage you've caused. The heavy timber door clicked shut. I understood then that if I waited for them to care, I would die in the drifts. I reached into my pocket for my own phone, the one thing Julian hadn't managed to take, and dialed 911. I gave the operator the coordinates, the gate code, and the nature of the injury. I can't feel my legs, I told the voice on the other end. And I'm alone. I wasn't truly alone. Through the glass of the sliding door, I watched the silhouettes of my family. I saw the steam rising from mugs of hot cocoa, as if the world were perfectly in order. When the sirens finally cut through the mountain air, Mark exploded. He stormed out, more concerned with the embarrassment of the neighbors than my state. A paramedic named Sarah ignored his bluster and knelt beside me in the snow. Her face hardened the moment she performed a basic tactile test. Spinal trauma, she called out to her partner. Requesting a flight medic transport. We need a clearing for the helicopter. My parents didn't ask about the diagnosis, they protested the cost. As the team tried to move the stretcher, Mark stepped in the way, his face flushed with indignation. She's not going anywhere until she transfers the $2,000 for her brother's property, he demanded. Sarah looked him dead in the eye. Sir, if you do not step back, I will have the sheriff's deputy arrest you for obstructing emergency services. He moved. In the sterile light of the trauma ward, my parents didn't talk about my recovery. They argued in the hallway about insurance deductibles. A specialist, Dr. Miller, eventually came in with the results, a burst fracture of the vertebrae. But then his expression shifted to something darker. We also found evidence of older, healed fractures, he said quietly. Consistent with long-term physical trauma and neglect. Before they could spin a new lie, the authorities arrived. It turned out Julian's camera had been recording the entire time. The prank, the shove, the sound of my back breaking, and the way they had stepped over my body to check a screen, it had all been broadcast to his small but active digital audience. The world had seen it before the paramedics even arrived. Julian was taken into custody for reckless endangerment. My parents' carefully curated reputations collapsed under the weight of public exposure. I didn't pay for the device. I filed a civil suit instead. Months later, while I was leaning against a set of parallel bars in a rehabilitation wing, my father called. He spoke of forgiveness, of moving on, and of the unbreakable bond of family. "You aren't my family," I told him, my voice steady for the first time in my life. "You were my employers. And I quit." I took a single, agonizing step forward. It hurt, but for the first time, the pain belonged to me. Some debts can never be settled. Some people are beyond saving. And sometimes, the only way to survive is to simply walk away.